Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. It's truly a great honor to be here in Fort Worth today. When I look out, what I see are entrepreneurs. I see people that are driving our economy forward, and that's really exciting, particularly in the world we live in today. So I have a couple of slides I want to go through. First one I must tell you is, as a custodian of retirement accounts, I am legally obligated to inform you that this presentation is not to be considered legal or tax advice, because as a custodian, we are prevented from providing any due diligence or investment advice of any kind. All we can do is execute your instructions. So with that out of the way, and if anyone here would like me to read the entire disclaimer statement, I'm happy to do it. But trust me, I think you've probably heard this before. All right, a little bit about me. I started my career back in 1979 as a computer programmer. I have, thank you, a fellow coder. I spent my formative professional years building software companies. Some I had the privilege of taking public, one of which was a phenomenal IPO back in 2001 where we raised over $1 million. And as part of that, we had the best financial advisors, accountants, private equity companies advising us. And no one ever said, by the way, you should seriously consider opening up a Roth IRA account so that you can put your money in your options and other investments and grow that tax-free. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to the Roth IRA as a opportunity for all of you to save significant dollars in your taxes. Just a show of hands, how many people out here have an individual retirement account? Okay. How many of you have Roth IRA accounts? Excellent. So you've had some great advice through the years. We know as a retirement account custodian that you have options. We pride ourselves in providing the best service at the lowest fees possible. The only way we can do that is through a technology advantage. And for those of you that have internet devices, you've logged on to Wi-Fi, I'm sure. Let me encourage you to go to myfreeira.com, myfreeira.com. We allow you to open up a self-directed IRA account for free, and you only pay fees when you make your investments. And when you make your investments, it is our standard low-fee options. That's enough of the advertisement for now. I know you're not here to hear me talk about the merits of our company. If you're interested, I'm happy to do that after the fact. All right. When I was the young man of about 5 years old, I learned a valuable lesson in life. It takes money to make money, my father says. It takes money to make money. So you are all interested in acquiring notes, aggregating those notes, taking non-performing notes and making them perform. And in a perfect world, you would have that opportunity without having to utilize any of your capital. And the question becomes, if you have an opportunity to make investments, do you have enough money to make those investments? Where do you find the money? And I'll give you another personal story. By the time we're done, by the way, you're going to be tired of my stories. I'm like a Dutch uncle. I can talk about anything, anytime, anywhere, on any subject. But this is one that I know very well. I have 2 teenage children that are in out-of-state college. Anyone have college-age kids? You have my sympathies. Oh my God, it's and those of you that have gone through it, I don't know how you do it and keep your sanity. Hopefully I will. But Every August, I have to write 2 checks, one to Purdue University and one to New York University, NYU. And if someone came to me with the best business opportunity, I could be an early seed investor in the next Facebook. How many times have you heard somebody tell you they had the perfect investment opportunity for you? Sometimes those make wild success, and sometimes they don't. And so you have to evaluate every investment opportunity. However, if somebody approaches me in the month of June, July, August, and they tell me that I have an opportunity to make a killing in this investment, and all I have to do is write a $100,000 check, I'm going to tell that person in the most polite way, it's not a good time. Right? Have any of you been presented with those opportunities, but it's not a good time? Because can you imagine the father of a 19-year-old woman who wants to conquer the world, that you have to tell her she can't go back to school because you have this investment that's going to pay off 10 years from now? You can imagine thinking that conversation, and my daughter would not tolerate me making an investment. Doesn't matter what the upside is for me, she wants to go back to school. Now, if that person approached me with a different option, which is, did you know you could make an investment with your retirement account? That becomes a different conversation. So I asked the question earlier, how many of you have individual retirement accounts, whether 401k or IRA accounts? And I saw the vast majority of you lifted your hands up that you do. Now the next big question is, how many of you today do your investing, particularly in notes, with your retirement account? You know, not so many of you. And the question is why? Remember, it takes money to make money. Now, if we look at the current reporting from the Federal Reserve, there's a very interesting statistic. If you took all of the checking and savings accounts in the country, and you aggregated them together, and then you compared how much is in retirement accounts, there's 12 times more dollars sitting in retirement accounts than there is all of checking and savings. So there is a vast opportunity, if you're an investor or you're trying to aggregate investments in notes, to look at another option rather than just checking and savings, because there's a lot of individuals out there like me that have financial commitments throughout the year that I can't make the kinds of investments that I want to make using my checking and savings accounts. Those are for the transactions that I have to do to run my life and provide my children with a better opportunity. But my retirement account is an entirely different subject. I have substantially more dollars available, and I have the ability to make those investments. Now, I'll go back to the company in 2001 that went public. We raised $1 billion. We had the best financial advisors, people that clearly have greater intelligence than I do. But no one said, did you know you could be like Peter Thiel? How many of you know the Peter Thiel story? It's a fabulous story. Not many of you do, so let me share with you what Peter Thiel did. Peter Thiel was founder of PayPal, a service that many of us use today. He took $2,000 and put it in a Roth IRA account. A Roth IRA account is an account where you pay the taxes on the money going into the account. A 401k or a traditional IRA account is where you pay taxes when you take the money out. We'll get to the Roth in more detail, but the Roth IRA account allows you to pay taxes today and then never pay taxes again on any of your gains. So Peter Thiel took $2,000, acquired his eBay stock options, his PayPal stock options, and there's some complications in doing that, and if anyone wants to do something like that, I can suggest some advisors that can tell you how to do it. But Peter Thiel's a smart guy, and so he had the best of advisors explain to him, take your $2,000, buy your stock options. Now, eBay turns around and buys PayPal for 32, and Peter Thiel's $2,000 turns into $32 million. And I'm going to repeat this over and over again. Tax-free. $2,000 that he paid taxes on, bought his stock options, turned into $32 million, tax-free. He then had the wonderful opportunity to invest in Facebook. So he took $1 million of that $32 million and became an early investor in Facebook. When Facebook went public, that turned into $250 million, tax-free. Starts with $2,000, pays the little tax on $2,000. Doesn't matter what tax bracket you're in, probably started with $3,000 after he paid the taxes, it became $2,000. Made that investment, now he's sitting on $250 million tax-free. Let's fast forward to today. It's no secret that Peter Thiel is a billionaire. He's invested in many other companies with this same approach. His $2,000 is estimated today to be worth $3.2 billion, tax-free. So you have this opportunity to be Peter Thiel. You have an opportunity to make an investment in notes, and you decide what profile of note makes best sense for your comfort level, or you find others and you aggregate those note investments. And if you do it with your retirement accounts, you have access to 12 times more dollars. But if you do it with your Roth IRA account, then you can have all the gain be tax-free. So when I give this story, I'm often interrupted and say, whoa, 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 whoa. My CPA says, my accountant says, my wife says, my husband says, I make too much money. I can't have a Roth IRA. Has any of you ever heard that before? Can't have a Roth IRA. Truth is, the government allows every one of you to have a Roth IRA by doing what's called the backdoor conversion. It's not a secret. It's called the Roth backdoor. And what you do, if you make too much money, you can take part of your 401k or your IRA account, and you can simply pay the tax. Now, if you withdraw funds before you're 59 and a half from your retirement account, we all know that you have to pay a penalty to do that. But if you do the Roth conversion, this so-called backdoor option, there is no penalty. So the only thing you're doing is paying tax. And you might think, but I don't want to pay tax. Take that for a second and think about it. At some point, you're going to have to withdraw money. And in fact, the biggest providers of 401k accounts, Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, and other companies, now recommend the moment you turn 59 and a half, you have a 10-year window, call it 11 if you want, to start pulling your money out and converting it from your traditional 401k or IRA into a Roth, because the minute you turn 70 and a half, you now have to take what's called required minimum distributions, RMDs. Remember, I told you I'm like a Dutch uncle. I have a story for everything. So my mother-in-law, I should show a picture of her. She is a lovely lady. She has been investing virtually her whole adult life. She's done very, very well. She's 91, and she has been withdrawing funds from her retirement account since she was 71 and a half. And she says to me one day, this is a couple of years ago, she says, Todd, what I do is I take the money out in my RMD and I pay the taxes and then I put it back in the stock market where I get the gains. And I said, Dorothy, why don't you put it in a Roth IRA account? You've got to pay the taxes. Now any gain you get from the money you already pay taxes on, you're going to have to pay tax on that again. Why not put it in a Roth IRA? And she said the same thing to me. I was told I couldn't have a Roth IRA. I make too much money. But now you're required to pull the money out. You're required to pay tax on the money, put it in a Roth IRA. So, if we look at the landscape today, and as I said, there's 12 times more dollars, what does that mean? Well, it means that there are over $14 trillion sitting in retirement accounts. So if you have notes, there's a captive market of investors. How big is that market? 43 million Americans have IRA accounts. Then you add the 401ks, and we'll get into the demographics here in just a moment. It's a huge number. And in fact, if you look at the IRAs, they outpace the 401k accounts. Yet most Americans don't know about IRAs. Most of them don't know about self-directed. And I give the example of the top investment bankers back in 2001 that advised us, Goldman Sachs, the top law firms. So along the way, I've learned that there is something called self-direction. Be like Peter Thiel, be able to make my own investments in the things that I know more about than the financial advisors that I hire. So then I can't help but share this with everyone. So I share it with my doctor, my dentist, my lawyer. And you know what people tell me? I didn't know I could do that. My attorney tells me this. My CPA tells me this. Now, for those that had raised their hands earlier, you know a little more than they do. But let's just examine for a moment the IRA market. I was fortunate enough in 1979 to open an IRA account. And if you look at the graph, that's not quite when they started. They started in 1974, but it was a very small number of dollars in individual retirement accounts. Along the way, in 1997, the Roth came about. And in fact, if you look from today and you go back, about every 10 years, the dollars double. So 10 years from now, this is projected to be just in IRA accounts, about $15 trillion. So looking at these numbers, the first thing that I'm often asked about IRAs is, how is it different than a 401k? Do you know what I'm saying? Individual retirement accounts and 401ks. Virtually everyone I know that works for a company has some kind of 401k plan, and if they work for a government agency, then it's often a 403b. But it is a defined benefit plan. An IRA is virtually the same thing, and in fact, you're able to transfer your dollars, we call it a rollover. You can roll over from your 401k into your IRA. And when people retire from their businesses or the companies they work for, oftentimes that's what they do with their 401k dollars. They just roll them over. There's no tax when you do that. You're not paying any taxes on it. So if we look at the demographics, if you are in between 40 and 50s in that segment, that roughly equates to about 70% of all the dollars held in 401k accounts today. So if you're in that demographic, you probably have a 401k account. The reason this is important is because that's 70% of the dollars that could be invested in notes. What's an interesting statistic is the middle chart. This is the Roth IRAs. And if you look at that, what you're seeing is that 40% of those that are in their 60s and older have Roth IRA accounts. The reason they do that is what I said earlier, the taxes. And if you see an investment opportunity, it could be relatively small or it could be large. But if you see an opportunity for an upside gain, then certainly the best advice would be to take the dollars you would make in that investment and pay the tax today so that your gain became tax-free. And that's what you do with a Roth IRA. So for those of you that are making investments in notes and you're not doing it with a Roth IRA, you have to certainly put in the equation of the gain and paying taxes on that at some point, not at the time of your investment gain, but rather when you take those dollars out, whether it's at 59.5 or it's at 70.5. But for sure at 70.5, you're going to have to start doing your RMDs. So when I show this slide, often I'm asked the question, how does Peter Thiel live? He's not 59 years and a half. Is he paying his taxes? But he has a Roth IRA. How is that possible? Well, there's another secret. It's called 72T. I'm not an expert on 72T, but I'll give you the quick overview. 72T says you can start taking and withdrawing money at any time from your retirement account, and you're not penalized. You can start doing this at 35 years old. We've all been told that you can't take money out until you're 59, otherwise you have to pay a penalty. No, 72T says you don't pay the penalty, all you do is pay the tax. But now I have all my gains sitting in a Roth IRA account. Well, I can start taking some of that money now. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to talk to your accountant about 72T and say, why can't I utilize that for my gains? The last chart that you see on your far right is a traditional IRAs. And what you're seeing there, 64% of them are held by people over 60. And the reason, again, is because they've retired or they've moved on from their work life. And so when they do, they roll that over. Now, when you do a rollover, how many of you actually go out to a certified financial planner, financial advisor, sometimes your brother-in-law or sister-in-law or somebody that you look to for advice? Well, statistically, there's only 14% of Americans that are actually allowing their financial advisor to make their decisions on where they make their investment. But what's really interesting is 41% of them don't seek any advice. And the reason for that is they have a little more insight. And I'll give you an example of this. As my daughter once explained to me, I'm going to be working the rest of my life to make sure I pay for her college, her wedding, her kids' tuitions, you name it. Right? And that's a job I take on very seriously. However, there are moments in my life when I get to close my eyes and I think about my retirement someday, and hopefully that's long term from now, but I think I know where I want to live. There's a little place called Sun Valley, Idaho. It's a phenomenal place. I'm going to tell you about it, but please promise me you don't tell anybody else, because it's an idyllic environment, community in Idaho. They have, in the summer, the symphony comes into town. They have top performers. It's a ski town in the winter, but the summers are absolutely spectacular. They have bike riding. They have everything you can possibly imagine and more. It's a community during the year of about 3,500 that swells up. For those of you that follow the financial news, you may know about the Allen and Company. Second week in July, I call it Summer Camp for Billionaires. All the billionaires, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Oprah, they all descend, 300 of them, on this little community in Sun Valley, Idaho, and they have summer camp. Basically, they get to be in rooms like these with lectures about things that matter in the world. they choose Sun Valley, Idaho. It's been there for 30 years. So Sun Valley is where I want to live. Now, when I look in my future, I think there's a beautiful piece of property right on the river. I could buy that today. And I could do that with my retirement account, and I could buy the land, and 20 years from now, when I decide to retire, I could actually build a house. And when I do, that's when I pay the taxes. But I could buy enough land that I could maybe build my house with the profits if I sell half the land. But I can do that with my retirement account. Now, that's something you can't do if you have your retirement account assets sitting at Fidelity or Vanguard or Charles Schwab or E-Trade, because the only thing they allow you to do is invest in exchange-traded stock market stocks and bonds. But that's not how the retirement plans were set up. You've heard of the term self-directed IRA. Truth is, every individual retirement account is self-directed. You get to direct where you want to make those investments. However, the companies that custodian those accounts for you, companies like IRA Services, they have preferences and in some cases hard and fast rules of what assets you can hold in your retirement account. Not because the IRS and the Department of Labor provisions and laws don't allow it. They don't allow it because it's hard work. It's hard work to provide administrative and custodial services for self-directed retirement accounts where you're investing in non-exchange traded assets. Having stocks in Apple and Google and perhaps IBM and other companies, that's easy. That's just a stock symbol and a dollar amount. The paperwork and the compliance for self-directed alternative assets is complicated. And that's where companies like IRA Services come in. However, you know more about where to make your investments. You're here. You see great opportunity in investing in notes. You want those notes to perform, and we'll get into that in a moment. What is important to look at is the geographic and demographic data when you invest. And if we look today at the population map of the US, what we see is that beginning in 2015, the largest segment of our population is millennials. Anybody have a millennial in their family? Yes. They're an interesting breed of people, and I'll get into some of the more demographic here in a moment. However, as an investor, it's something you absolutely must know what the characteristics of a millennial is, because you might be acquiring notes, and those notes may actually be the borrower may be a millennial. But you could have, and I'm so sorry that in the back you can't see it. I'm happy to make these slides available to anyone that may want. But if you look at the very lowest item, 30 million Americans are in the silent majority. That means that they're over 70 years old. Now, we call that the greatest generation. And I would be so rude if I said I see a few of you out there. Forgive me if you look fabulous, by the way. I admire everything about that generation. Millennials, on the other hand, are 18 to 34-year-olds. They have an average FICO score of 636. How many of you want to be a lender to somebody with a FICO score of 636 versus an opportunity to lend to somebody that has a FICO score of 740 or above? Certainly you want to look at that. However, there's some interesting data about millennials. As I said, they're now the largest segment of our population. 60% of them have plans to buy homes. What does that mean? In today's world, you can't buy a home without having a good credit score, FICO score. So these are individuals that are consumed on a daily basis of how they improve their credit rating. Those are the best borrowers to me because they don't want to default. 75% of them say home purchases are vital to them. This is something they want to do. They want to raise their family, they want the security, all the things that traditionally we have known because we're homeowners. Here's the demographic makeup of these millennials. The average age is 26 years old. Their average income is $50,000. Their FICO score is low compared to other segments of our population. Only 14% of them have homes. If 75% of all millennials want to buy homes and yet only 14% of them have homes, that says there's a massive buildup coming of individuals to want to buy homes. Now, for those of you that have secured promissory notes on properties, this becomes your target market of buyers for the properties that you have. What's really interesting is that the credit card debt is fairly low on average, $4,000 total credit card debt for individuals that on average make $50,000. So less than 10% of their income is in credit card debt. That's very encouraging. And 64% of them have some form of student debt. We'll go into that in a moment because that's important. Now, where do they live? They live all across the US. Sometimes they're your next door neighbor. Sometimes they're, your family members. They're living in, and for the most part, they're living in what they consider the cool areas, the major metropolitans. So, in looking at the data and doing some data mining, what's really interesting is how many of those millennials in the major markets that have homes, what kind of homes do they have? And the affordability of homes, what's on the market today? So I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, where we have a motto: you don't get to buy a home, it's too expensive. If you're going to be a long-term renter, and if you have rental property, that's a good thing. But if you're a millennial, not such a good thing. However, it's a market that they want to live in. And when you look at the MSA, and I'm often asked, MSA, I'm not a statistician, what does that mean? It's a metropolitan statistical area, so the overall area of San Francisco, and it encompasses the downtown San Francisco, the city, and it encompasses 60 miles away in Livermore in the East Bay. And I met Virginia, who's in Santa Clara County, in Santa Clara. And Virginia, where are you? You should be out there somewhere. That is also in the MSA, the statistical area of San Francisco. So we look at that and the availability of not just affordable housing that's for sale today is 2% for single family. In San Francisco, 7%. So how many of you want to, I'm so sorry, you're gonna get tired of holding your hands up. How many of you want to be investors in the San Francisco Bay Area? Okay, a few. Now, let me contrast that with the major metropolitan area of New York, where there is far more inventory of available properties. Miami, an area that's had its ups and downs. And then Houston, Texas, an area here, looks pretty good. 82% availability for single family and 94% for condos. So if you're a millennial looking to buy a home, that's a good place to do it. So let's just profile and look at 3 different segments: strong, moderate, and weak. These are categories of how you would, if you will, put into the broader buckets of millennials. Those that are strong in terms of their readiness to buy a home, who have a less than 45% debt to income ratio, versus a very weak that has a greater than 45% ratio And then let's also compare the FICO scores between those. So clearly, as an investor, and all things being equal, you're going to want to loan money to the strong and not the weak. So the total sampling of over 11 million, the average FICO score was about 678, of which, out of that 11.5 million, 30% of them had homes. Out of which, 30% of them were millennials, and 70% were non-millennials. So the vast majority of those individuals are actually home buyers. And then to further segment, on the far right of the screen, you'll see strong, moderate, and weak. So over 18% strong likelihood and readiness to be a homeowner, which means if you have notes, that's a captive market, right? So let's examine a little more detail about the education level and individuals that have mortgages, whether they have graduate degrees, undergraduate degrees, and their average income. What's surprising is if you have a mortgage, it really doesn't matter what your educational background is. Your, in fact, income is typically a little higher, and you can look at the curve. So the weak, if you have a low income, you're a weak potential buyer. If you have a mortgage, you're probably a potential buyer for an upgrade of a new home or whatever, right? Maybe an expansion. How does student loan debt, because the vast majority of millennials have some form of student loan debt, how does that factor, and how much debt, whether it's one loan or more than one loan? So over 33% of the millennials that have student loans have more than one loan. But what's really fascinating is the ones that have mortgages actually have a pretty small payment for their student loans, which means if you look at this chart in any great detail and analyze it back and forth, it basically says if you're going to be a buyer and ready to make an investment in a mortgage or a home, your student debt really doesn't factor, because going back to the millennials, they have a small, relatively lower FICO score, 636 from what I remember. What they desperately want to do is buy a home, so they're constantly making sure that they're current on all their payments. So if you're making investments in notes, that's an important factor to kind of consider, the demographic of the person that borrowed the money. Right? So what is the prediction of the home likelihood? What are the factors? Number one, FICO score for sure, the age of the person, the student debt, the credit card debt, all the things that traditionally go into consideration are there. What's not so much a factor is their gender. What's not so much a factor is how many children they have, or their education level, whether they're a high school graduate, a college graduate, or an advanced degree. It's really the basics, all the things that we've ever learned and applied in our own life. When you first went out to buy your home, these things were true then and they're true today. Your FICO score, how much debt to income ratio you have. Nothing's changed, the fundamentals are there. So in analyzing the data a little further, where are the great opportunities for new home buying? And I'll equate new home buying with value of performing or non-performing promissory notes. Well, it turns out some pretty interesting cities. I would have never suspected the greater New York area is actually a good place to look at because there's a captive audience of readily available borrowers. These are the millennials that want to make a home purchase of some kind, whether it's a condominium or it's a single family home. Greater Houston, I have to tell you, there's no correlation to being here in Texas. I would have never suspected Houston as being a better place to be than, say, Dallas, Texas, or San Antonio. For sure, one of the high-cost areas, as I said earlier, San Francisco. And then there's some that, frankly, aren't good at all. Hopefully none of you are from San Bernardino County, which is in Southern California, out in what we call the bedroom community. It was hit very hard in 2008. But there is still opportunity. So wherever there is a market that is struggling, there's always opportunity to make money in that market. So I have a few minutes left. I want to re-emphasize the lesson I learned when I was 5 years old, because I had this great business idea, and my dad said, yes, it takes money to make money. So if you're interested in investing in notes, or you're currently investing in notes, and you're not doing it with your retirement account, then clearly you're limiting your potential, not just ability to invest, but ability to generate profits by a factor of almost 12. So there's 12 times more dollars there. And if you're not doing it with your Roth IRA account, then you're not maximizing your profit long term, your net profit, your after-tax profit. So again, IRA services, myfreeira.com. We know you have choices in the marketplace. We pride ourselves with better service and lower fees. And for that, I thank you for this opportunity to share with you.